Good morning to everybody, and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are logging in from. It's always amazing to connect with people from different parts of the world. And one of my favorite topics, which is negotiation. And thanks to Sales and Profit team. So we have I'll run you all through some of the concepts and what it is to think about negotiation, because negotiation is a huge subject. It can't be curtailed in 1 hour, but what I'll do is I'll take about 50 minutes to take you all through the best practices, the fundamentals of it. What can you actually think about when you're looking into negotiation? And then I'll leave 10 minutes for you all to come back with your questions. I'm not watching the chat box at this point in time, but Lijo is going to help me for that. And I will probably stop at every 15 to 18 minutes to see if I am missing out anything, if any questions are there from you all to address. Okay. With that, I just wanted to introduce myself. I've been in sales for almost 3 decades, and I have been with organizations in the technology field for a very long time, and worked with multi-regions and multi-cultures. Just a quick introduction about myself. And for me, sales is a passion because it's about solving customers' problem, and negotiation becomes a part of it, right? So what are the objectives of today's webinar? I'll take you all through. And we all believe that negotiation is a part of our lives. When we wake up in the morning, we're negotiating whether we want to, when the alarm rings, we're negotiating to snooze the alarm or to just stay there for some more time. So negotiation is there everywhere. That's a fundamental of our when we deal with people. So that's the baseline. Now, how do we look at negotiation? What is the psychology of negotiation? What do I understand about negotiation? All of this is what we're going to look at. The mindset. What's the difference between selling, persuasion, and negotiation? One of my favorite topics is the addiction to yes. We're so addicted to the word yes in negotiation. So how do we work through that? What are the types of negotiations we see? What does these terminologies called Vatna, Batna, Zopa, all of that mean? When to negotiate, when not to? What is the timing? What kind of timing should we keep in mind? What kind of negotiation style can we learn about? And most importantly, what are the mistakes to avoid in negotiation? And like I said, the best is at the end. What do great salespeople, average hardworking sales professional versus great sales professionals in negotiations do? So did I change?
Yeah, I think you need to go to the slide mode actually.
Yeah, something is changed. Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, now it's okay. Now it's okay. Yeah.
Okay, so let's understand negotiation first. And then we'll move into the psychology of negotiation and why it's important. I'll help you understand. Negotiation basically is a strategic discussion, right? It's an interaction between 2 entities, 2 people, 2 parties, ultimately to work towards agreeing on mutual interest. That's the fundamental of negotiation. One of the biggest challenges we face in negotiation is when you're involved with another party in negotiation, we view negotiation as a battle. And that battle is characterized by, I'm going to get stuff from you that you don't want to give me. It's more like, what am I getting more from you? That's how we have been viewing negotiation. And it's a feeling of win because I've taken something more from you at the same time, and I've kept you away from getting my stuff. But if we view negotiation as a battle, then we already have a problem there. So what is more important is that when we look at negotiation, if as an act of a collaborative problem solving, it's typically an act of a collaborative problem solving and looking for a solution that makes me better off, not from the other person, but from the situation together, it's a win-win situation. How am I going to make things better for each other? Better off for my alternatives, which I have now, or better off for my status quo, which is what is changing for the better for both of us. Because in negotiation, there's no specific command and control in negotiation, right? I cannot and should not force someone to say yes. All I can do is, present the proposal and the value the proposal is going to bring to you, or the conversation or the point of view which is going to add value in your in our engagement, and help you see that value. And that's the most important part. And that will drive you to think whether it is in your interest to say a yes or no. So that's typically what are the nature or the way we need to work towards. That's the way we need to understand negotiation to be, and not as a battle. So once I take that perspective on negotiation, which clearly highlights the importance of the other as well as me. So when we say win-win, it's not only for one person, right? It is for you and for me. So many other things open up while negotiating, whether it's negotiating for your salary or for, whether for your rent or your client on value or price, whatever it is. The moment you're keeping the value in between, what is in it for you and me, then your negotiation becomes much better. And I'll tell you, much better, when I say much better, it becomes more of a collaborative problem-solving approach, right? So, and when I said, let's understand negotiation and the psychology of negotiation, there's a reason for it, because we're dealing with people, right? At the end of the day, we all have our emotions. We all have a way to respond to things. So I just wanted to bring forth a very, very interesting study I was going through. This is by a Harvard psychologist and a best-selling author of The Happiness Advantage. And I encourage you all to look up for this. His name is Sean Acker. I hope I'm pronouncing his name very well. He says that our brains work 31% better when we are in a positive frame of mind. I mean, 31% better than what we are. And which typically means your intelligence rises when you're in positive frame of mind, your creativity rises, your energy level rises. In fact, it is found that that every single business outcome improves if your brain is at positive frame of mind, and 31% more productive. So imagine in the form of when you're in a negotiation table, I'll just come to that. And most importantly, because we're talking about sales and the sales world and the business of sales, it is said that you're 37% better in sales in positive frame of mind. I mean, this is huge. This is tremendously a great jump, right? If we can make you 31% better in a positive frame of mind, imagine how better your negotiation will be, or your discussion will be with the other person when you're keeping. So it's the psychology of negotiation. Why we need to bring this here is because emotions play a lot when you are actually working with your other party. Now, why does this happen? This is not a philosophy, but this is a biological study wherein they say that because we have something called mirror neurons in our brain. When you're mirroring your emotion to the other person, whatever that would be, if it's positive, you're mirroring back. So there's a reflection of that response. When I smile at you, you smile at me back spontaneously, because there's a chemical reaction which happens in your brain, and you are already set the person to work along with you. And so it's very important to first have that kind of an approach, have a positive mind when you're actually dealing with people. I mean, this really caught my mind. The 31% is huge. I would never give up on this, right? So, Tony Robbins, one of the biggest, coach, one of the very famous coach, he says it's a 2 millimeter shift. That 2 millimeter shift, that is the change or the response which you're actually sharing with that person. So imagine when you're in a negative frame of mind, you're actually reflecting that much, negative response. So the reason why it is important to keep a positive frame of mind in negotiation is because this negotiation is a very time-consuming act. It takes a lot of energy. So it's very important to know that if we can be 31% better, then we have a better outcome, we are able to work towards a collaborative conversation with the other party. So everybody, so typically everybody when who you're dealing with, maybe with less or more intensity, will typically have this question when you're dealing. What do they have in their mind when they're dealing with someone? When anybody is encountering in a business or in a conversation, the only thing, when you begin to pitch, the only thing they have in their mind is, how are you going to help me? Right? That's the only question they have. They ask themselves, do you see what I see? Remember the mirror image, the mirror neurons. The question they have is, how are you going to help me? And by asking that question, they're actually asking you, do you see what I see when I'm sitting across and having the discussion? And when your response is, I understand what you're trying to say, rather than I see what you see, there's a complete shift in the way they respond to you. You remember the human mind, as I said, it's got mirror neurons. When you say, I see what you see, the chances are that they believe you've got answers to what they want. So you already got the person towards working towards that engaging conversation with you. So that 2 millimeter shift, answering that question, how am I going to help them? Now that takes me to a very important area. I'm just taking you through the concepts before I even get you to understand how you negotiate, what are the timing. I'll just take you through some of those very, very important factors you'll have to remember while you're planning your negotiation. So when you're dealing with someone in the business or or anyone otherwise, the first question they ask, like I said, they ask us, do you see what I see? And how do we avoid, I call it the yes addiction, in negotiation. So before even we get to work towards how do we look at negotiation and how do we start a negotiation, let's let's get out of some bad habits, on what's hurting you the most in negotiation. What I've seen is the addiction to yes, when we all can agree to it. We are so used to listening to the word yes. We have this bad addiction to, as we have said, because we are taught as listening to yes as a winning factor. Or, if I don't get my opponent to say yes to me, it's a feeling of loss. That's typically what we think. So we need to first get out of those bad habits of just listening to yes. And your question could be that, isn't that what we are working towards when we are having a discussion? Yes, we are working towards having that discussion, but how do we turn that yes, a no to a yes? There is a concept and there's a way to do it. So, and when I say we have an addiction to yes, typically we have a negative connotation to no. No is the ultimate negative word. We fear of hearing it. But at the end of the day, yes is often, I would say, meaningless answer, because that hides a very deeper objection, maybe even more, a deeper objection when somebody's saying, okay, I'll talk about it. Yes, I'll let you know. They have not actually come in terms to be working with you. They're just saying it, but not meaning it. There is a lot of objections which is hidden below when somebody is saying an yes. So pushing hard, why do we need to know that? Because pushing hard for a yes in negotiation does not get a negotiator closer to you. Actually, it rather angers the other side, because you're actually getting them to say yes for something which they're not probably very clear about to give up. And there's a reason why it is. The reason is, when somebody says no, the first thing to go after for anyone to in a discussion is, I want to say no. But remember, in negotiation, no is the start of negotiation, not in the end of it. Because people are very often resistant to change. Change is not a very comfortable situation to be in, right? And no actually gives that a little protection from that state of fear. So the first thing they want to probably create a defensive mechanism to them is to first object, or to just say, I'm not right now interested in talking about it. No is creating a sense of barrier which can keep themselves protected. It's a state of fear which they are trying to protect themselves. Yes is a feeling of giving in. So, that's the reason which I said, think you need to understand the psychology of negotiation. When I say no, my mind is saying I'm protecting myself from something which I want to give away. Talking from the other party's perspective. And the same thing, if you're on the other side of negotiation, the first thing which we think about when somebody is coming to me, if I'm not seeing value or having any kind of inner understanding, is I'm going to first say no, and then I'm going to have a discussion. So no typically means that it gives a little protection from the state of fear. So how do we turn a no to a yes? Jim Camp in his book says, start with a no, says, gives your counterpart a permission to say no right from the beginning. Give them the permission to say a no right from the beginning, because he calls it the right to veto. He said, the moment you give them a permission to say no, now you are actually bringing them in an environment which becomes more constructive and collaborative. You're actually giving them a reason to work with you, to talk to you. So when you give them the right to negotiation, the environment becomes very constructive and collaborative. Great negotiators seek for a no, because that's when your real negotiation starts. So how do we do that? How do we set up for a no? To have a conversation in a way, or ask questions in a way, setting up for no is what we say. For example, I would rather than saying that, can I share some interesting advice or ideas to you? I would rather turn that statement as, would you be against me sharing some interesting ideas for you? No, that no is setting up for an yes, right? Do you feel it's not a good idea to talk about this project now? Is it not a good idea to share some more data point? No, it's not a bad idea, but we can talk. You're actually setting that person to open up the discussion. Or when you don't hear from the other party, when you submitted a solution or a proposal, you would probably ask, have you given up on this solution provided? Have you given up on this solution provided? What does that mean? Immediate. You remember when I said no is a sense of protection. So the first point which will come in their mind is, no, I've not given up on the solution. What have you done now? You opened that person to have a conversation, right? So setting up for a no is actually getting the person to say yes, which you're looking for, right? Or, but just be careful. Don't ask these questions just for the sake of it. It depends on the situation, depends on the environment, depends on the person, depends on how prepared you are. But when you're preparing for your negotiation, try to get away from the addiction of yes. Prepare your questions in a way that, if I have to talk to someone, I would say, is it a bad time to talk? Instead of, do you have a few minutes? Do you have a few minutes? They would say no. But if I say, is it a bad time to talk? No, it's not a bad time to talk. We can have a talk for about 5 or 10 minutes. You're actually setting that person to say a no, which ideally is coming up to become a yes for you. That's the start of a negotiation. So whenever somebody is responding with a no, that means you have already set the tone, you've set the environment for that person to be safe. Now you're having a constructive and a collaborative conversation. I always say in negotiations or in sales, if you're starting to explain some things, that means you're starting to lose. Because explaining is losing. That means you're still trying to convince the person, pushing the person to listen to you, right? When you start engaging with that person with valuable conversation, keep helping that person or creating a safe environment for that person to have the discussion with you. Now you're set the whole, the whole format for that person to start opening up to you. And now negotiation becomes far better. So setting up for a no is one key thing you should take away from this. and moving away from the addiction of yes, because what we have seen is great negotiators seek for no, because that's when the real negotiation starts. So with this, what we will start moving into is trying to understand between, since I picked up the point about when you're telling, you're selling. This is what I always say. When you're telling, you're telling the person why they should deal with you. But when you're asking questions, you're helping the person understand why they should deal with you, right? So let's understand the difference between selling and negotiation and persuasion and negotiation. All of them who are veterans in sales, they all know that selling is about providing a solution that can solve their business problem. This is the fundamental selling, right? Selling means you are, you're signifying that there is something of value for the customer, your customer to consider to discuss or work with you. That's the definition of selling, right? There is a value and the customer is willing to consider that value. But negotiation is about what is the value they decide for solving that business problem. What is the value they're putting for that business problem? How much are they actually, how much are they willing to give for the value you're creating? So the more that is, if you create more value, your negotiation starts becoming, you don't have to really get into that discussion of really negotiating. So the idea is so selling is all about providing a solution that can solve the business problem, and negotiating is clearly about what is the value they decide for solving that business problem. That is, if you dive in and start to negotiate before you have finished selling, then the customer won't have any real chance to recognize the true value of what you have to offer. So before selling, if you start negotiating, then they're not seeing the value, right? So, it's often, thought that negotiation forms as a part of every sale. It's like an imperative. It's like, something you can't avoid. But the fact is, if you sell well, you won't need to negotiate. So, and that's why we say the timing is important. Do you really need to negotiate at all? So if you can increase the buyer's desire to buy, this will reduce their need to, need for the need or the requirement to negotiate. That's what I would say. So keep increasing the value for the buyer, and increase their desire to buy. Of course, by driving value, making sure that you're helping the customer solve their business problem, trying to fix their issues, trying to understand what can you do better for them. And your negotiation, you don't have to spend more time on negotiation. Like I said, negotiation is a lot of time-consuming activity. So how can I reduce that aspect and make sure that I'm driving value? That's something which you need to constantly think about. So if a customer is, expressing a need to sell, a need, if they're expressing a need, because anything they want is they're expressing a need, right? So you got to sell by addressing and meeting those needs. You're not negotiating there. You're actually understanding the need and you are addressing those needs and you're meeting those needs. If the customer is expressing objections is not the time to negotiate. You got to sell by correcting any misunderstandings that the customer is having or the other party is having. I'm calling your customer or a client or party because we're talking about sales negotiation, but this applies to anything, any part of your life, in your personal or a professional life, when you're dealing with people, So if there is a customer objection, they're expressing an objection, you should sell by correcting any misunderstandings they're having. Objection means there is a misunderstanding, manage those limitations what you can, offset those objections. Objection does not mean that your customer is negotiating. It only means that you have not addressed those areas which he or she is not clear about. Okay. For example, if your customer says that, well, I need lesser delivery timelines for what you're proposing. Is this a negotiation situation or a selling situation? I know you're on mute, so I'll answer for you all. when he's saying that I need lesser delivery timelines from what you're proposing, this is not negotiation. He's expressing a concern probably. Maybe he has a timeline to meet. Maybe he has an internal, expectation that has been set in. So before saying yes or no, understand why is this person expressing this concern. So this is not the time to negotiate. This is still your selling is still continuing. So don't dive in and start negotiating about, no, I cannot do this delivery timelines because no. Just stop, have those questions asked, that what is the need for having the lesser delivery timelines? What is that I can improve? Where can I help? What can I add value more there in that discussion? How much leeway can he or she can give us on those delivery timelines? Have those conversations and then see, and then move into, so if you've completed those or addressed those needs, then your negotiation part becomes extremely well. You've got value for the customer, and average hardworking salespeople consider selling and negotiation as same or overlapping. Selling is not negotiation. Great sales professionals, they understand that negotiation starts when selling stops. These are the traits we have seen with average and average salespersons and great sales professionals. I can take maybe a 30 seconds break here if anybody has any questions. Lijo, am I on time? Because I'm so deep diving into the topic. I'm so enjoying this that I'm on it. So is there anything I need to address? Any questions, any points, or I can continue?
We had one question from LinkedIn Live. So it's from Derek. He says, isn't no questions leading to yes need to be close-end?
Is no question leading to a yes a close-ended?
Yeah.
Good question. A question leading, you have to set up your question in a way that leads to a yes. So yes, we need to look into what kind of open, because the moment you're leading to, you're setting up for a no, you're actually working towards an open-ended, it's an open-ended question. For example, like I mentioned, is this a bad idea to consider? No. Okay, so so you're opening up a conversation, you're leading towards an opening of the conversation. So it's leading towards, it could be a close-ended from the characteristic of it, but you're leading it towards opening up a conversation, if that answers.
We have one more question from Mukesh. So he says, for project, how to do negotiation, because all the project is on EPC mode and contractors will choose those products which rates are minimum as per his bill of quantity.
Okay. So that's a whole different conversation, because if your contractor is selecting your solution or your BOQ or your proposal, or they're selecting the least price, that means you've not driven value. They're not seeing value in dealing with you. So first, which is why I say stop selling, create value. What is the value you've created for your customer, for them to see why they should deal with you? And it also depends on the people you're dealing with. If you're talking to a procurement or a contractor or someone who's actually looking into the criteria meeting, obviously they're looking into what are the criteria you're meeting. Price is meeting, vendor, criteria are meeting. You're meeting all their criteria. Then the only way to look at for them to pick you against the others is the price. So this is to do a lot about, you're not negotiating here. You have to start understanding that what more can I drive value in this conversation, in this engagement? How can I differentiate myself, not from just from the competition, but from differentiating my solution that can help them look at it as a better option to look at? Then price becomes a secondary factor. I'm not saying price will never be a point of conversation. Yes, it will be a point of conversation, but it'll become more less sensitive. You would still be able to get one bit above the other, when you're able to drive a value conversation with them. You have to talk to different people within that organization, within that opportunity, to really understand, am I able to solve the business problem? Am I doing much better than what they would want, what they're expecting? How can I help my customer? How can I help mitigate my customers' challenges? So if we can have that discussion a little more in detail, I would love to talk to the person who wants to know a little more in detail. So one thing to remember is when somebody is telling your price is higher than the other, they are only evaluating you on the price because there's no other criteria for them to evaluate for you. That means they're not seeing a differentiation. They're not seeing for what am I paying more for. They're not able to understand that, which means we have not driven that value for them to see that value. You'll always have customers wanting to, that's a different set of, then it depends on whether you really want to do business with them. Price is the only criteria they're looking at. But if it's B2B, then of course, value is something which you really need to think on bringing on board. Any other questions? Shall I move on?
We have one more question from Arvind. So he says, would the sins of Betna covered in the session or just an overview?
There is. That's why I said the best is at the end. That's a strategy, right? So we have 30 minutes more and I'm going to cover, we have got a couple more slides. So it's very important to first, for us to understand what's the difference between selling and negotiation. What's the psychology of negotiation? Because it's a lot to do with emotions and people. And then we'll look into what are the types of negotiation, what are your styles of negotiation, how do you plan your strategy? So the next couple of slides are going to be clearly on those areas. Okay, so I'll move on and we'll take questions to the next break, next 15 minutes. And I think I will another 20 minutes and I can probably wrap up and I'll look for more questions. Quick overview of what's the difference between persuasion and negotiation. Persuasion is having a unilateral move in accepting your position. You know, if I can persuade someone, then negotiation becomes less. Why negotiate? You know, create an influence. The question which came up as to how do I drive value? How do I move out of the price conversation? If I can persuade someone, then why negotiate at all? You know, create an influence with this person. Your influence should be so good that they want to just work with you. And persuasion is trying to convince them on the value you're driving, so that you're able to help them to make a decision to partner with you or go for your deal. You know, you're driving basically a message that join us, and if we do come together, then there's a greater impact on the value we're providing. Sometimes when you persuade, the other person can come around. The golden rule in negotiation is try to persuade so your negotiation becomes negligible. But for all of this to take place, preparation is the key for your persuasion to work, for everything to work in your selling and negotiation world. Preparation is a key for your persuasion or selling to work. Now, in short, while negotiating, you need to, I would say, use the art and science in your approach, because only logic don't work and only tactics don't work. And we'll see why we're saying what I'm saying in more detail. We'll look at the mindset to be kept in mind when we are negotiating. This is a very important factor, because this defines how well can you, the mindset is everything, right? In this context, the mindset is about, am I under the position of power or am I under the position of pressure? And I can understand with them, I would define, whether I'm in the position of power or pressure, depending upon the way I've prepared, the value I'm offering, the kind of perspective I'm driving in the conversation. And typically pressure comes from, what's at stake for me to lose? What's the amount of time and energy I've invested in this? And should I drop it? Should I not drop it? Pressure comes from what is at stake, where your preparation is much lower, where you're wanting the person to say yes, wanting the person to be, give you more than what they think they should take through. So when you're in the position of power, you you are in a position of power when you're more prepared, right? I'll simply put it that way, and I'll move on to the next. And what we have seen is great sales professionals, they drive perspective in the discussion and focuses on problem solving. When you're driving perspective in a discussion and you're focusing on problem solving, you're able to address all the areas much early. There are no surprises, any surprises post sales. You're sure about it. That's what the trait of great sales professionals we've seen. An average hardworking sales professional, we're seeing that they come under a lot of pressure before entering the negotiation. That's the reason is because there's too much at stake. You know, the amount of time and energy you've invested, you don't want to let go. And they try to keep everything under the carpet so that they don't lose out. So and when things go, you know, post everything is over, when there are a lot of surprises coming through, then you're actually setting yourself to failure for the next deal with the client. Remember, in negotiation or in a sales environment, it's better to lose a deal than to lose a client. So it's always you got to be sure that what are you entering into, how much of information are you able to drive. Your mindset should be more on the position of power than getting into the position of pressure. We said planning for negotiation, right? And asking the questions around why me is the critical part of when you're working towards negotiation. Questions like, there are always other alternatives there. So what is that I'm differentiating and what am I bringing to the table? The why questions, which I'll not go deep down in because it would take a lot more time and I would like to go into the types of negotiation. The best way to understand the, other party's position and control the conversation is to ask more questions, looking for a reason to deal with you. If someone asks you that, if someone asks us to put down a term which we are not entirely happy, then we can react or disagree with it. But the smart thing to do is to ask the question about why do you want a longer term payment terms? Why are you looking for a longer contract terms? Why do you want it as different deferred payment methods? Try to uncover that before you negotiate on this. Why do you want the deliveries delayed? And so the ability to ask these questions is simple but extremely powerful in the negotiation context. 22% of skilled negotiators' behavior is to ask questions, is what we've seen. So, and most importantly, timing in negotiation. Timing is a key in negotiation. If you've started a negotiation before your selling is over, or before you have driven value and addressed all your customers' needs, then you're typically on a sliding slope. Salespeople can make negotiations unnecessarily difficult by negotiating when they don't have to, or by negotiating too soon. Before there's a mutual interest in making a commitment, before they have enough information. So to avoid such situations, begin negotiation only after the 4 negotiation criteria have been met, and which is where the timing comes as a very important factor. What are those 4 criteria? Gain a provisional commitment from the customer, propose deliverables, terms and conditions, and prices, attempt to resolve each of their concerns with your selling skills, and confirm that all their concerns have been addressed. That's until you met these 4 negotiation criteria, you should just try to sell the value of the deliverables, the terms and conditions, the value, and when you meet these criteria, you're ready to make the transition from selling to negotiation. So timing is a very important factor in negotiation. Don't negotiate too soon. When I say don't negotiate too soon, unless your customer has given you or has confirmed their understanding of what you're driving the value, you don't start your negotiation. Again, negotiates too soon in the selling process. Average hardworking person, we have seen that trait. And great sales professionals, they negotiate after receiving a condition agreement to the deal and have addressed all their needs. Now we come to what the audience have been asking for on the types of negotiation, and we'll move to the Vatna, and Zopa. I'm going to bring in 3 areas. There are everyone negotiates something every day, right? And due to this, people develop different negotiation styles, right? We typically have a habit of relying on these preferred negotiation styles because it has worked for us in the past, or because of our temperaments. Each of us have our own temperaments, right? So people many times use the same negotiation style to resolve a conflict instead of altering their styles, so that they can fit that particular situation. So always relying on the same style of negotiation can lead mostly to an unsuccessful outcome, because you can't use the same style in every negotiation situation. So how do I identify that? What are those different ways? What are those different ways to negotiate? And so we look into that one by one. They're called competitive negotiation, collaborative negotiation, avoidance, accommodative negotiation, and compromise in negotiation. And experienced negotiators know how and when to use this different negotiation. So how do you know the circumstances under which to select a specific style or to choose the right style of negotiation? How do I know which negotiation style should I be adopting when I'm with the other party? So there are two important factors to consider to identify which style should I adopt. None of them is static. None of them is the only one you should go after, but all depends on two things you should be considering, which is, what is the outcome? What is that outcome which I want to look for in this negotiation? What is that I might lose? What is it at stake? That is the outcome, is a one factor to be considered. And the relationship part. How will the negotiation affect you or your relationship with the other party? So these two important factors to consider before picking up your negotiation style. The moment you identify that, then you know which style of negotiation I want to pick and move. I always look at it as how important is the outcome gained by the negotiation. I look into that factor. How important is the past, present, and future relationship with the other party with this, and so which model should I pick? How important is this relationship for me? What kind of outcome am I looking for? And when I look at these areas, when I look into these two factors, then I know which one to pick and which one to adopt as my negotiation style. So we look into each of them and what are the circumstances which could actually lead us to pick those negotiation styles. So we look at the first one, which is competition. Competition is purely a win-lose. That is, I win, you lose. Very competitive in my negotiation style. But this style is useful when the outcome is important and relationship is not. If it's a one-time sale, for example, if you're going to buy a car, a house, a travel ticket, I'm not going to go back to that travel agent again, or I'm not going to go back to the real estate broker again, or I'm not going to go back to the car dealer again. So it depends on what is the outcome you're looking for. And I've done my deal. I'm done with it. This is also true in B2B sales, not only in B2C sales. But B2B sales, when your client is, I win, you lose comes in a situation when your client is contractually bound with you, and they have no option to go to anyone else due to the agreement they have. But they're still trying to get the best value out of the partnership. So if I'm complacent about it, that this customer is anyway contractually bound with me, and I start working towards a win-lose situation and not a collaborative situation, then, like I said, you got to think about, and if you think that's the only way to work towards it, and my customer has no other option but to work with me, outcome is what I'm looking at, then you take a competitive style. Not highly recommended, but not recommended because this style is risky most often, because one, you might lose the customer because you may not want to come back after the contract is over. Two, it's extremely time consuming when you're moving into a win-lose. You're not developing a relationship. But again, like I said, it all depends on the outcome. If you are having a one-time sale, you're having a you're just not going to go back to that person, then you can take a competitive approach into negotiation. Like I said, you have all the power. It's a one-time agreement. You have a strong alternative. You value the outcome more than the relationship, and the other side has no way of retaliating. Then you take a competitive negotiation style. We look into the collaborative, the second style, which we look at, which is a collaborative, a win-win situation. This is highly recommended because we started this whole conversation that negotiation is about a collaborative effort. It is about collaborative problem solving. And a win-win is an attitude to problem solving. Here, there is a very conscious effort to know and uncover the true interest of both the parties, so that there can be more potential points of agreement, where you are constantly seeking mutual benefits. You're always asking, is there a better way out here? Collaborative is to take the other party into consideration, and the other party is also taking your view into consideration. Is there a better way to address this situation? Is there a better outcome which we can drive together? Collaborative negotiation definitely takes more time, but the ROI, when we say the return on investment, is always realized, because the win-win model is focused on making sure all the parties have their needs met, right? Because and in this style, like I mentioned, it's constantly striving towards mutual benefit. You're always asking, is there a better way? And both parties go back with the feeling of win-win. If they really feel that we have improved the situation together on this. In this style, your outcome and relationship, both of them becomes important, because the purpose is to maximize the outcome and to protect the relationship. This style is apt when you're developing and maintaining a relationship is important, where both parties are willing to understand that on the other party's needs and objectives, and you're looking for a long-lasting relationship. You're becoming more creative in your solution outcome. It's the most difficult because it takes a lot of time and a lot of investment. But when you think about negotiating with your stakeholders, think about a collaborative negotiation, because that's the best way for a long-term relationship. Again, it all depends on the situation. It's not about one way of doing it, but it also depends on how important the outcome or the relationship or both are for you. The next type of negotiation is the avoidance negotiation. This is clearly a lose-lose. I lose, you lose model. In this style is used when both the outcome and the relationship are not important. It can be very taxing and energy consuming. And what we need to ask, and why do we come into this situation? It is used when the negotiations concerns a matter that is very trivial to both parties. And this strategy is used when you move out of an active negotiation situation, or by avoiding the negotiation completely. You're just trying to kind of keep away those trivial things out, and then you want to move ahead. So you're trying to avoid conversations which can probably become a bigger challenge later. So avoidance negotiation is a I lose, you lose, because post negotiation and post closing the deal, if you start having surprises, it's not good for both the parties. So I would say avoidance negotiation needs to be avoided if it is if the outcome and relationship both, or it depends on the kind of the value of the deal or the kind of clients you're dealing with. If you want to just avoid the deal or avoid the situation itself, but not a very conducive situation to or a negotiation style to adopt. The next is accommodative negotiation, accommodation, which is a I lose, you win model, and is directly opposite to competitive style of negotiation. It's not a I win, you lose, but I lose, you win. In this negotiation, relationship is kept at the utmost importance and not the outcome, because, and this style is mostly used, what we're seeing is when one party is trying to probably cover up. If you're in an I lose, you lose situation, you get into an accommodative negotiation situation in the next deal or the next situation, because you already probably overcommitted, you avoided certain things, you undelivered in the past, and now you're trying to cover up for it. So you're trying to accommodate yourself, in your next negotiation. You're trying to repair the relationship. You're trying to win this deal or you're trying to win this deal for the first time to get your foot in the door. Accommodative style is always used when you're trying to overcome something in the past which you have probably not looked into. It's the best style to apply many a times if you want to strengthen the relationship, you want to improve the relationship, your personal factor, or support the other party because you want that person to win. So that's about accommodative style. And the last style is compromise. We call it the split the difference. Unlike a collaborative style, the compromising negotiation style follows I win and lose some, and you win and lose some. There's something both parties are trying to come to an agreement. Compromising is a style most people think of as negotiation, but it really only is about bargaining. Compromisers use this style instead of finding a solution that can fully benefit everyone. It's often described as splitting the difference. You're splitting the difference, and compromising style leads to an agreement about halfway between both parties. It's an acceptable style in many circumstances, but because compromising shows some concern for the relationship, right? And it does also accomplish your gain on the outcome dimensions. It might lead to satisfying some of each party's needs, but what we're seeing is it does not maximize the situation as collaborative negotiation style. Sometimes it can bring about an unsatisfactory feeling because the feeling that you gave too much and didn't get enough in return, or it's typically used in situations where such as where the dynamics as time is stopping the player from reaching true collaboration. Time is a factor, and you want to come into compromise so that you can move. And so it depends on the situation you're dealing with. What are you trying to lose? What are you trying to give away? So compromise is a style when you want to move ahead, of course, in relationship and outcome. But remember, there's certain areas which you and the other party will lose. But trying to accommodate that later as you move into the relationship is an apt way to deal with it. So we'll come to understanding the types of negotiation. Now that we've understood the types of negotiation, we're going to look into how we set our limits in negotiation and how do we define a strategy. And that's what we call the Bhatna, Vatna, and Zopa. Any questions before I go in there? I think we have another 7 minutes and I'm almost on the last 2 slides. Lijo, any questions?
No, Lina, no questions so far. You can continue.
Okay, cool. Okay, so before negotiating, what is the strategy I need to have in mind? What is the importance of defining your limits and defining your available alternatives in negotiation, which is what we call the Bhatna, Vatna, and Zopa. There are many terminologies but Bhatna is the oldest, I could say, 1981. It was used originally by Roger Fisher and William Ury in their book, which is titled Getting to a Yes, Negotiating Without Giving In. So whenever you consider these factors, you're developing your negotiation strategy. Bhatna stands for your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And what does it mean? That this means that what is your action if you're not able to reach to a mutually acceptable agreement? What's your best alternative? If you're not able to reach to a mutually acceptable agreement, then what is my limit of where should I, where does it stop? What's your action you're going to take? It is often used in, BATNA is often used in negotiation tactics, and you should always consider your BATNA before negotiation takes place. It's never wise to enter into a serious negotiation without knowing your BATNA. The value of knowing your best alternative is what is the value of knowing your best alternative to your negotiated agreement is that it clearly provides an alternative if negotiations fall through. It gives you an alternative. If the negotiation is falling through, what's my best alternative of that? It provides you a negotiation power, actually. It fixes your reservation point, the worst price you're willing to accept. Where does the limit stop? So my BATNA is such an important factor for me to consider before I enter into a negotiation, because it sets you to understand when to walk away. What's your best limit? And the same with VATNA. VATNA is the worst alternative to a negotiated agreement. This means the worst result the party could get, even if the deal is falling off. But it's so know your VATNA. When I say know your VATNA and know your BATNA, so VATNA will help you decide when to walk away from a bargaining table. Does it really make sense to really work through this opportunity? VATNA is the thing VATNA is an option which you can do without the cooperation of the other party. This is something you are keeping the worst alternative to your negotiated agreement. And it is extremely important to know your BATNA and VATNA while planning for your negotiation, because negotiations takes a lot of time and money, like I said. And it is important for you to know what's your tipping point, which you are walking away from this deal, so that you can invest your time on whether this opportunity or the other opportunity, which has better probabilities of winning. And when to look into what is ZOPA, ZOPA is a range in a negotiation when two or more parties can find a common ground. You're coming into a common ground. That's your zone of possible agreement. Probably I could call it as a compromise. Here, the negotiating parties can work towards a common goal and reach a potential agreement that at least it incorporates some of the others' ideas, when we talk about the compromising kind of style. But remember, BATNA, VATNA, or ZOPA is not your goal. It's your baseline option. Always keep your BATNA as your secret, because this is your last trump card you're going to use when you're negotiating, right? Just to give you an example, I've just extracted this from one of the examples I saw, and I thought this could be a best way to represent what is BATNA, VATNA, and ZOPA. You see on the extreme, you see the seller's BATNA and the buyer's BATNA. What is the best alternative they would like to walk away from, and what could be my best alternative I could walk away from. ZOPA is a zone of possible agreement where I'm walking towards a possible collaborative or compromise. And so what's the limit out of which I would probably move out of this negotiation, or I would go ahead on this negotiation. So that's BATNA, VATNA, and ZOPA. I just wanted to bring forth what are the mistakes to avoid in negotiation, because before I share with you the last slide and I take your questions a little more, what are the mistakes to avoid in negotiation? We spoke a lot about strategy. How do we plan? What's the importance of asking questions, setting up for a no, the psychology of negotiation. But we also need to remember, what are the three things? If I could bring three very important points to avoid a negotiation. The most important lesson to remember is the relationship between two parties while negotiating. It should be clearly viewed as a partnership and not a dictatorship. It's not you against me. You can't bully your way through. You have to problem solve. So focus on problem solving and not winning the battle, because if you find yourself in a battle and power struggle in negotiation, you've already lost it. And the key to be able to solve a problem negotiation is to understand your counterpart, to know what motivates them, what will influence them to move the same path of agreement with you. Because there's no command and control in negotiation. I cannot force you to say an yes. And remember, that works for your counterpart too. So goals are important. You definitely need to know what deals are good for you, but you also need to have flexibility in how to achieve that goal. So flexibility is a key in negotiation. If you forget to be flexible with the other person is not flexible with you, then you're mostly in a power struggle. So focus on problem solving. Don't create a power struggle. Set a goal, but learn to be more flexible in achieving those goals. And the most important slide, as I always say, I leave it here. I won't go through it. I want the audience to read this through. This has been, I think, I should credit Vishal and CR for this. This is a beautiful comparison they've come up with. And I thought it's amazing to share it. I'm sure one of the blogs, they have also shared it on their LinkedIn pages. But so that it's more visual, I thought this will be interesting to share with you all. What's the difference between average hardworking sales rep and great sales professional? So I leave the slide here for the audience, and I would love to take any questions if we have.
Yeah, Alina, we have one question. So
yeah.
So Satish asked, could you please explain Bhatna and Vatna with an example?
Okay, so that's the example I had given here. Bhatna is your best alternative to a negotiation or agreement. That is, if your range is from, if you're negotiating for $10,000 and your best alternative to walk out of that situation is 6, so you keep that best alternative in your mind because you're setting your mind towards working towards your best alternative. The reason why we need to set that limit is so that you're not, moving into a power struggle. That's your best alternative, and you know when to stop the negotiation because the outcome and the relationship to be kept in mind, right? So I know 6 is my number, which I need to keep in my mind, and 10 is what I start with. I work towards the direction of having that conversation where I know when it's moving towards, and I present that number at that point in time when I know that this is a point of moving out. So I work towards that direction, towards the number. So your best alternative is 6. You're not going lesser than that. So when you set your tone or you set your limit, it helps you to work towards the direction of, meeting that number to your best possible action.
Okay. One more question from Arvind. So he says, knowing Vatna before arriving at Bhatna is the process, or they are independent from each other?
It's not one depend on the other, but it's important to know what's your worst alternative, what's your best and what's your worst. Because when you're walking into a negotiation, you need to know, like we said, it's time consuming, right? And energy consuming. So if I don't know what's my worst alternative, then I'm constantly in the power struggle and I'm losing. Maybe I'm losing or my customer's losing. I get into a competitive style. So it's important to know both of them so that you know when to walk out of it. What could be the worst situation of my when I'm in a negotiation table? So I wouldn't say it's dependent, but it is relevant to keep these. I wouldn't say it's dependent on independent, but it's relevant to keep these point of references very clear.
Okay, one last question from Arun. So he asked, in this competitive market, every organization will try to display their product or service value with their clients. However, budget become key factor to both the buyer and the seller. So how do you approach to this situation? And
budget is always, sorry, Lijo, go ahead.
Another question is, what do you think is the most challenging part while closing a deal and negotiating?
So I'll take the first question, that in such a competitive world, when, if budget is what they're looking at, like I always say, if your customer is looking at just the price, then somewhere you're not driven the value. what we have seen is price is not the only factor for your clients to make a decision. Price is one of the factors. If you look at any research paper, we're just looking at some of the, when I speak to my clients, they say, I'm not able to see the value for me to give that extra buck, which I was mentioning about. When you're selling, if you're selling a product and service just on the price base, then you're always struggling to position yourself. But if you're helping the customer solve the business problem, addressing the challenges, seeing what so that takes a lot of time, right? That takes a lot of effort. That takes a lot of insights and information about your customer, knowing their industry, knowing what's changed in their business, knowing what's their competitive landscape like. If I'm not having all that information, and I'm going into a conversation with my client to make sure that I get the deal, then you'll always fall into a price factor discussion. I'm not saying that you can always avoid it, but you can always reduce the price sensitivity discussion. If you really understand what is the outcome or what is that your customer is trying to achieve, what is the business problem you're able to solve for them? How are you adding? I would rather say more than adding value, how much are you creating value for them? Are you building more opportunities for them? Am I engaging with them or am I selling to them? So all these aspects are such an important factor for you to be out of that, the price conversation. If you're not early engaged with your customer, if you're not asking those questions as in, what can I make? What can I do better for my client? You'll most often fall into the price discussion because your buyers are also going through a decision anxiety, right? They have so many quotations coming to them and they're trying to see why should I pick, one against the other? If everybody are having almost the same description, the same BOQ, now my only way to decide is price, because that's the only alternative I'm looking at. But if I'm able to see more value the other person is giving me and giving a reason for them to talk to you, engage with you, and understand your solution, then you're helping that person, that customer, or that individual, that the other party, to become or get better. So then you can move out of your price sensitivity discussion. What is the other question, Lijo?
Just give me a second. So another question was, what do you think is the most challenging part while closing a deal and negotiating, and how do you revert back with an intention of not losing the client?
What is the most challenging part is, it becomes very challenging when you're not prepared before negotiation. How do I prepare? That is, and most important is when your timing, you don't pick the right timing while negotiation. When I say right timing, I'm not saying the time of the day or the month, or I'm talking about, have you finished selling, or have you addressed your customers' needs? Have you clarified all their concerns? Have you uncovered their objections and clarified it? After that, when you're both coming into an agreement, okay, now we're moving towards, closing that deal. Now you start negotiating maybe whatever they have to negotiate on, then it becomes better. The most challenging part is when you're not prepared. You're not preempting what could be the objections. Have I resolved their concerns? Have I understood what the customer needs? Have I, helped them see the value of the solution, how it's going to impact them? If I'm not driven all of that, then negotiation becomes extremely challenging. That's what I've seen, because then you're under pressure. You see the power versus pressure. Then you're under pressure because you have too much at stake. You spend so much of time in that conversation or in that deal or in that account, and I'm pushing towards telling my customer, pushing my client to give a yes. And that kind of puts them onto a little, it irritates them because you're pushing them to tell an yes, because you're under a lot of pressure. So that's the worst that can happen in negotiation. And I don't know what's my point of, my batna, as I say, how do I drive towards that? There was the last bit you said, challenging, and what should we do, you said, right? to not lose a customer.
Yeah.
So I would always recommend that work towards a collaborative kind of an engagement with your customer. What's in it for you and what's in it for me, a win-win situation. It's always better to lose a deal than to lose a client. If you think if we are not coming into a zone of possible agreement, we are not moving in a direction which is adding value for the customer, you're not able to drive that value, and they're not, the only point of discussion is product, price, and you're not able to differentiate that. Then it's always better to walk out of it as well, walk away from it, and make sure that your relationship is kept intact. And then you start building that value for your next conversation, next negotiation, next deal. So it's always better to lose a deal than to lose a client. So more than driving value, creating value for a customer. Help them see what they didn't see probably. Help them understand what's the impact of taking an action or not taking an action. Help them see the value they are going to have with you. All of that is possible if you as a salesperson or you as an individual understands their environment, their business, their challenges, their customers, what's changing for them, what's their competitive landscape, what is that they're going through, why are they even coming for the negotiation, what are the areas I've not covered, which is putting them in a position of negotiating with me, right? So, and it also depends on the personas you're going to meet in each of them have their own zone of possible agreement. So it's not only you're negotiating with one person in an opportunity, you are actually talking to multiple stakeholders. Have you addressed their concerns, their views, their requirements? So you got to keep all of them in mind before you really sit on the negotiation table and say, okay, what next? What is it that we can work towards? So if I've answered that point.